Hey, welcome back to the Potter Show. We've got something fire today. Harry touched the Potter vault door at age 6 and every Dumbledore block shattered in front of goblins. Likes and subs keep us going. Alright, story time. Chapter 1, The Door That Knows Its Own. The train to London left at 7:30 and Vernon Dursley drove to the station the way he drove everywhere, with the specific aggression of a man who believed the road was a personal inconvenience designed by other people. Harry sat in the back seat with his knees together and watched the motorway unreel through the window and did not fidget, because fidgeting was the kind of thing that started conversations he didn't want. The letter had arrived on Tuesday. The second letter, a third, actually, if you counted the one that had come 6 weeks ago that Vernon had torn open in the kitchen with the letter opener he kept specifically for correspondence he suspected of being good news for someone else. Harry hadn't seen that one. He'd heard it through the kitchen floor, lying on his back in the cupboard listening to the particular acoustic signature of Vernon in a state of high outrage. Potter estate had been one phrase, disputed account was another, and then, Gringotts 11 o'clock, bring the child. Child was how Vernon referred to Harry when speaking to other adults. Harry had been noting this since he was 4. The second letter came Thursday. This one Vernon hadn't torn open. He'd stood in the hallway holding it for 45 seconds, which Harry knew because he had been counting from the crack under the cupboard door, watching the shadow of Vernon's feet on the hall runner. He'd gone to his study with it and stayed there for 2 hours and come out smelling of whiskey and looking like a man who had found a complicated mechanism he didn't understand but intended to use anyway. We're going Saturday, you're coming. You say nothing, you touch nothing, and if anyone speaks to you, you look at the floor. Harry had agreed to all 3 of these conditions and had privately assigned each of them a probability. Saying nothing, high; touching nothing, moderate. Looking at the floor, very low, because the world was consistently more interesting than floors. Diagon Alley was the first problem with the floor-looking policy. They came through the leaky cauldron, which smelled of wood smoke and something herbal that Harry had no category for, and Vernon navigated the dim pub with his shoulders up and his chin down, pulling Harry by the wrist through a space that was clearly intending to be looked at by every part of Harry that existed. He looked at the bar, where a man was drinking something that gave off purple steam. He looked at the fireplace, which was throwing 3 different colors. He looked at the patrons, several of whom were wearing robes in colors and combinations that would have caused Vernon Dursley to have an aneurysm if he'd looked directly at them, which he was carefully not doing. And they were in the alley itself, and the floor-looking policy was not just difficult but structurally unsound, because the alley was vertical as much as horizontal. Signs stacked 3 deep on storefronts, window displays with objects doing things that windows displays do not do on Privet Drive, owls on perches outside a shop whose sign Harry read at a sprint pace as Eolip's Owl Emporium before Vernon's wrist grip accelerated to compensate for Harry's slowing. Above, the narrow strip of sky was a deep Saturday blue, and swifts cut through it in patterns that were either very natural or very much not. Harry tucked everything away. The architecture of the place, low and close and very old, with the upper stories of buildings leaning toward each other over the street as if they'd been conducting a conversation for several centuries. The sound of it, a marketplace noise with something else under it, a frequency he didn't have a name for. The people moving through it in ones and twos and family groups, and the way the family groups moved, not like families at a shopping center, faster and more purposeful, children pointing at things and adults already knowing where things were. He hadn't known before today that this existed. He cataloged this fact about himself. The cataloging took no time at all. Gringotts announced itself before they reached it, the marble visible at the far end of the alley like something that had been dropped here from a different century and had been waiting since then for the street to catch up. It was white and enormous, and the goblins at the door were wearing uniforms, which Harry had not anticipated, and were carrying weapons, which he had also not anticipated, and were watching the street with the expression of people engaged in a task they considered beneath them but intended to do correctly anyway. Vernon walked past them without meeting their eyes. Harry looked at both of them. One of them looked back. Inside, the marble floor and the ceiling high enough to be a weather system. The rows of tall desks, each with a goblin engaged in writing or weighing or examining something through a magnifying lens. The noise of many quills, many scales, many hushed transactional conversations. The smell of the place was stone and metal and something older, like the smell of a very old book, except the book was the size of a building. Harry looked at all of it. Vernon went to the nearest available teller, Griffook, said the small nameplate, and produced the cream envelope and the letter from the solicitor. I have a meeting, Vernon said, 11 o'clock, the inquiry into the Potter account. Griffook took the documents without touching Vernon's hand, which Harry suspected was deliberate. He read both. His eyes moved at a speed that suggested they were reading considerably more than the words. "You are Vernon Dursley, guardian of the account beneficiary Harry James Potter." "That's right. And the beneficiary is..." Griffook looked past Vernon and looked at Harry. Harry looked back. "Present," Griffook said, more to himself than to anyone. "Very well. The secondary account vault is in the lower west corridor. Identification for the guardian. Please provide the letter of guardianship, the Wisengamot ward order, and the probate certification." Vernon reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He produced the letter of guardianship and the probate certification. He reached for the ward order. There was a pause of about 6 seconds. "The ward order," Griffook said. "I have it somewhere. Without the ward order, we cannot verify the guardianship status under the charter provision that governs this account." Griffook's quill did not stop moving. Whatever he was writing on the ledger sheet to his left had no apparent connection to Vernon's situation, and this was clearly intentional. "You are welcome to obtain a copy from the Wisengamot Records Office and return at that time." "The meeting is at 11, Vernon said. "It is presently 10:43. The Wisengamot Records Office is in the Ministry of Magic, which is..." "I know where the ministry is." Vernon's neck was doing the thing. "The solicitor assured me these documents were sufficient." "The solicitor is not Gringotts," Griffook said, with a serenity that was the closest thing to a weapon Harry had ever seen used without physical contact. "The account charter was established in 1891 under the authority of Charles Henry Potter, and its terms are not subject to interpretation by external legal practitioners, however qualified." Harry had stopped listening to them at secondary account vault. He was standing 3 steps to Vernon's left, where he had been placed because Vernon wanted him visible enough to point to as evidence but not close enough to be addressed directly, and he was looking at a corridor that branched off from the main hall at the far left. The corridor was different from the main hall, narrower. The lighting changed at the threshold, from the bright, functional overhead light of the hall to something that came from the walls, recessed in small brackets, a warmer and more amber tone, as if this part of the building predated the rest. The floor of the corridor was a different material, not marble, something darker with the dull finish of very old stone that had been worn smooth by a long time of use rather than polished. Harry looked at it and then, because Vernon was deeply occupied and not watching him with any particular accuracy, took 4 steps toward it. The boundary between the main hall floor and the corridor floor was precise. He put 1 foot over it and felt the temperature differential. The corridor was cooler by several degrees, the way basements are cooler, except that the change happened at the threshold rather than gradually. He stepped in. The corridor ran about 20 meters before it bent out of sight, and every meter of it was lined with vault doors. Harry had expected vault doors, having extrapolated from lower west corridor and account vault, but the actuality of them was something different from expectation. They were not uniform. Each one was its own thing. One was plain iron with a single lock at center. The next had so many locks it looked like a piece of industrial machinery. The one after was sealed with chains that moved slowly, like heavy rope in a current, without any visible mechanism providing the motion. One had markings on its surface that, when Harry looked at them directly, appeared to be in motion, not changing exactly but shifting under observation, the way a stereogram shifts if you hold your eyes at the wrong angle. He walked. Not with any specific destination, because the walking was informative. The corridor bent twice left and right and opened into a wider space, not a room, more like a widening of the corridor itself, where the ceiling rose and the walls stepped back. And at the far end of this widening, against the back wall, was a door unlike any of the others. Black. Not the black of iron or the black of paint, the black of a material that handled light in a fundamentally different way, as if it was doing something active with the light that fell on it rather than simply failing to reflect it. The torch brackets on either side held fires that gave off almost no light in the conventional sense. Instead, they illuminated a small radius of runework in the stone floor directly beneath them, concentric arcs of carved symbols that Harry crouched to look at. He knew, or his body knew, the way it knew things before his mind did, the way it knew when someone was behind him before he heard them, the way it knew when a teacher was about to call on him, that this was different, that it mattered. The door's surround was carved from a stone that wasn't the granite of the rest of the corridor. Paler, almost white, shot through with veins of deep green, and those veins moved in the way that rivers move in their slowest sections, imperceptibly unless you were watching one fixed point for a sustained time, which Harry was. At the center of the surround, at approximately Harry's chest height, the stone was different again, older. The pale material here had a faint depression in it, barely visible, not carved, not deliberate, but worn over a very long time into a shape, a handprint. 4 fingers and a thumb sized for a child's hand. Harry looked at it for a measured time. He thought about Vernon still arguing with Griffook in the main hall. He thought about the probability of anyone coming down this corridor in the next few minutes. He thought about the fact that he was standing in a place that was clearly not meant for unauthorized visitors, and the further fact that the handprint was exactly his size, and the further fact still that the whole building, since the moment he walked in, had been doing something that he didn't have language for, a response to his presence that was less like a reaction and more like a recognition. He pressed his palm to the print. The first thing was a sound. Not loud, it was the opposite of loud, the very low frequency that you register in your bones before your ears, the kind of sound that old buildings make in high wind when they are being moved by something larger than themselves. The floor took it first. Harry felt it through his shoes, a vibration like a long, slow exhale through stone. And the runework on the floor came on, from the door outward in rings, not the amber of the wall brackets, something else entirely, a color Harry could only name as the inside edge of a flame, the part that is nearly white going gold, going something that has no color name in English because fire isn't one color, it's many, and this was all of them at once. Each ring lit as the wave reached it, 1 per second, and the wave moved outward without diminishing. Harry counted, 1. The brackets blew out, not violently, just ceased as if a switch had been thrown. 2. The runework extended past the edges of the wide section and into the corridor proper. 3. The temperature in the wide section changed, not colder, not warmer, but electrically different, the way the air changes before a storm, the charge you feel in your back teeth. 4. Harry's palm on the handprint felt something left him. That was the only geometry for it that worked, not taken, not extracted. Leaving in the way of something that had been held under pressure and had found the pressure suddenly insufficient to contain it. The fist, the thing he hadn't known was a fist, the constant background compression that had been the entire texture of existing in his body since before he had words, unclenched. The world changed. He didn't mean change the way things change gradually. He meant it in the way that adjusting a lens changes what you see through it, not a different image, but the same image with depth it didn't have before. The rune light, the carved stone. The deep green veins in the pale surround, still moving but faster now, visibly faster, pulsing. The sound of the building around him, the deep constant hum of a very large, very old structure, which he had been hearing since he walked in but now heard as individual components. The vaults in the lower tunnels, the weight of the marble above, the wardwork running through the stone like circulatory system. He could feel it, not with his hands, with something underneath his hands. Something that extended out from him in every direction like a sense he'd been using at low power his entire life and had just been switched to its actual capacity. It was very loud. Behind him, from the direction of the main hall, Vernon made a sound. Not words, the sound a large man makes when something beyond his comprehension is happening near him. Harry heard him start moving and then heard him run, which was unusual because Vernon did not run, and the running was away from Harry's direction, not toward it. Harry did not turn around. He took his hand off the print. The rune light stayed. The rings were still propagating. He could feel them leaving the building, going through the walls of the corridor and into the stone of the street above, and he thought about Diagon Alley outside with all its people and its owls and its movement, and the rings going through all of that, through all of them, through the foundations of the old buildings leaning toward each other in their centuries-long conversation, and further. The door had not opened. He stood in the rune light and thought, of course it hadn't. He hadn't asked it to, Mr. Potter. Griffook was pressed against the corridor wall 6 meters back, touching the stone with one flat palm the way a doctor touches a chest to listen. His expression was not frightened. It was the expression of someone receiving information through an unusual channel and concentrating on getting it right. How far, Harry said. The perimeter sensors extend to the ward boundary. Griffook did not stop touching the wall. The wave has passed the ward boundary, so you don't know how far. We'll have a reading shortly. The outer sensors will tell us. He looked at Harry. You should come with me. Where? The director will want to speak with you. Harry looked at the vault door one more time. The rune light was fading now in the corridor behind him, not gone, but diminishing, the rings having passed out of range of what he could perceive. The pale surround of the door was still faintly luminous. The veins had slowed back to their river pace. He was, he noted, entirely alone. The sound of Vernon's running had long since reached the upper hall and either exited the building or become inaudible. "All right," Harry said. He walked back the way he'd come, through the corridor's two bends, through the threshold where the temperature changed and the floor changed material, and back into the main hall of Gringotts. Several tellers who had been at their desks when he walked in had vacated them. Two were behind the far counter looking at a piece of equipment Harry couldn't see clearly. One was still at their post, quill still moving, with the determined professionalism of someone who intends to keep writing regardless of what the floor does. Harry walked across the marble to where Griffook was now holding the door to a side corridor, not the west corridor, a different one, and went through. The cart that came for them at the private platform went up. That was the first surprise. Harry had constructed a model of Gringotts based on the available evidence. The vault corridor was down, the main hall was at street level, ergo the important things were deep, and the cart going up immediately required a model revision. The tracks here were narrower, the tunnels bored more carefully, and the direction was continuously upward through stone that had been finished rather than left raw. They arrived at a landing carved directly into the rock, with a single doorway in it framed by two sconces burning amber. The door beyond was heavy and studded and already open. Ragnarok, director of Gringotts, was standing at a window on the far side of a desk, reading something on a parchment he held at arm's length. He didn't turn when Harry came in. He finished reading, set the parchment on the desk, and then turned with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who has made their position clear by the act of finishing what they were doing first. He was not large. Harry had been running expectations of authority figures at various sizes, and it kept being wrong in this building. Ragnarok was compact, with the stillness of something that has decided what it is and requires no further movement to confirm it. His eyes were very dark and his focus was the kind that'd wait. "Mr. Potter," he said, "sit." Harry sat in the chair that was the right size because of course there was a chair that was the right size. He had noted this, catalogued it, filed it as significant. Ragnarok sat. He looked at Harry for 4 full seconds without speaking, and in those 4 seconds Harry understood that this was a man measuring something. He sat still and let himself be measured. "The wave," Ragnarok said, "extended to a radius of 38 miles before our outer sensors lost resolution. We're waiting on corroborating data from our field network, but the initial reading is consistent." He placed one hand flat on the desk. "What did you feel when it happened?" The question surprised Harry, not its directness, but its subject. Everyone who had arrived to observe the aftermath had asked what happened. Ragnarok was asking what did you feel, which was a question about the mechanism, not the effect. "Something left," Harry said, "like pressure coming off." "Yes." Ragnarok opened the ledger on his desk and turned it 90 degrees. "The pressure was deliberate, it was applied." He looked at Harry with care that was not gentleness but was its own form of precision. "Before I tell you what I'm about to tell you, I want to ask, how much does an adult typically explain to you before expecting you to agree with what they've already decided?" Harry looked at him. "Nothing," he said, "usually nothing." "That," Ragnarok said, "is what I expected." He turned the ledger to face Harry. "Then let me do this correctly." He told Harry about the charms first. All 6 layers in the order of their application, the outermost, the diagnostic concealment, the one specifically tuned to evade Gringotts sensors, the deepest layer closest to the core. He described their function in the plain engineering language of someone who has analyzed a mechanism rather than been subject to it. The effect, suppression to 14%. The duration, 5 years and 23 days from November the 1st, 1981 to this morning. The signature, singular, belonging to one practitioner. He said Dumbledore's name without preface and without aftermath, leaving it in the space between them like a piece of evidence on a table. Harry listened to all of it. When Ragnarok finished, he was quiet for 8 seconds, which he used to run the implications forward, not emotionally, practically. Everything he knew about his life at Privet Drive, every strange thing he'd been unable to explain. The times food had appeared on the high shelf in the kitchen precisely when he needed it. The time Dudley's gang had cornered him behind the school gymnasium and he had somehow been on the roof 30 seconds later. The time he'd been so angry at Vernon that every light in the house had blown out simultaneously. Running all of it through the new information and watching everything recontextualize, 14%, he thought about what that meant for the remaining 86. He thought about the way the vault corridor had felt when the charms came off, the depth of it, the new presence of everything around him. He thought about the rune work and the rings, and then he stopped running the implications and looked at Ragnarok. "Who is Dumbledore?" he said, "not who is he to have done this, just who is he?" Harry needed the dossier before he ran any further analysis. Ragnarok gave it to him. Chief Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, headmaster of the school he would presumably attend, the man who had placed him with the Dursley family on the 1st of November 1981, the man who was broadly considered the foremost magical authority in Britain. He placed me with them, Harry said. Yes, one day after my parents died. Yes, and then put these charms on me. Within the first 48 hours, based on the dating in the resonance data, Harry thought about Petunia Dursley, who never spoke about her sister and kept a photograph of her in a box at the back of the wardrobe that Harry had found at age 4 and replaced exactly as he found it. He thought about the way Petunia looked at him sometimes, not cruelly, not kindly, with a specific wariness that he had always read as dislike but now understood might be something more complicated. Fear, possibly. The way people look at things they have been told are dangerous. He thought about what it would mean to be told to take in your dead sister's child, and to be told at the same time that the child was dangerous, needed managing, had been seen to. He did not examine what he thought about that. Later, my parents' money, he said. The vaults. Ragnarok opened a different section of the ledger. Potter main account, established 1891. The current balance, along with the estate properties, investments, and trust holdings, is. He turned the ledger to face Harry. Harry looked at the number. He looked at it for long enough to register it, not the magnitude in any personal sense, but the structure of it, the way it was composed of how many generations accumulation, and then he looked at the column to the right. External Management Authorized Agent, APWB Dumbledore, effective November 4, 1981, 3 days after his parents died. Below that, the disbursement log, a long column of dates and amounts, none of them with a corresponding entry in the heir authorization column, which was blank every single line. It was not a partial record or a sampling, it was the complete record. The column was blank from the first entry to the last. Every decision made about his money, his property, his estate for 5 years blank. Harry looked at the left side of the ledger and the right side of the ledger and the absence between them and felt the specific stillness that comes when you have been given a piece of information that rearranges everything behind it, not one thing. Everything that was dependent on the arrangement of the things before it. Is the management arrangement legal? He said. Under Wisengamot family law, a guardianship order grants the guardian extensive administrative discretion. The order was filed 3 days after your parents' deaths. The filing itself is technically procedurally correct. Ragnarok folded his hands. However, Harry looked up. Gringotts operates under the authority of the 1689 Charter, which predates the Ministry of Magic, the Wisengamot in its current form, and several of the statutes under which the management order was filed. Under Charter law, the disbursement of funds from a hereditary vault account requires the authorization of the heir's representative. An external management order filed with the Wisengamot does not constitute heir representation under our framework. He held Harry's gaze. It never has. So under your law, Harry said, he had no authority. Correct, but under their law he did, also correct. And those are different laws. They have been in productive tension for 300 years. A pause exact in its timing. We have a number of legal opinions prepared on the subject. Harry looked at the blank column again. He said carefully, what are my options? Ragnarok told him. 3 paths. The first, return to Guardians, existing arrangement continues. The morning's event becomes an incident that was contained. The second, Wisengamot challenge, which would take years and unfold on ground where Dumbledore had built his political house over decades. The third, the 1689 Charter provision, Clause 7, Subclause B. He explained the clause in full. Harry listened without interrupting. When Ragnarok had finished, Harry said, what does Gringotts get? The question went into the room and changed it slightly. Ragnarok recalibrated visibly the same way Griffook had in the vault corridor, not with surprise but with the adjustment of someone whose model has required updating, and who is willing to update it. Active heir management of the Potter account returns to its proper axis, Ragnarok said. The current arrangement has been suboptimal from a Gringotts perspective. An account of this scale under the direct management of its heir with our advisory services generates considerably more in both financial returns and institutional standing than an account under external management that has not historically prioritized those interests. He looked directly at Harry. And the House of Potter, reactivated and independently represented, carries significant political weight in the wizarding world. That weight has been effectively neutralized for 5 years. An active, independent House Potter is useful to Gringotts in ways that exceed the purely financial. Useful how, Harry said, the relationship between the Goblin Nation and the wizarding establishment has never been equitable. We operate under restrictions that we consider unjust and have considered unjust for centuries. An allied wizarding house of the first rank whose head has personal reason to be skeptical of the establishment's good faith is useful in advocacy contexts. Harry absorbed this. The honesty of it struck him as more valuable than a more flattering answer would have been. He looked at the ledger, he thought about useful, and about whether useful was something he minded being, and about the difference between being useful on someone else's terms and being useful on your own. "I want to read the clause," he said, "the whole clause, not a summary." "Of course." The document appeared, placed by the same goblin who had been at the wall. Harry had registered him at 440 on entering, had categorized him as staff, revised this to highly placed staff at the moment. Ragnarok had not looked at him before the document appeared. The goblin's name he didn't know yet. Harry read the clause. It was dense. He read it twice and asked two questions, one about the specific definition of legal domicile of record, and one about the practical mechanism by which Gringotts' fiduciary protection superseded a Wisengamot ward order. Ragnarok answered both from memory. Neither answer was simplified. Harry put the document down. He kept one hand on it. "If this fails," he said, "if Dumbledore finds a mechanism to override it, what happens? You return to the status quo ante. The suppression charms cannot be reapplied without your consent under the 1953 regulation. The activation of your full core is now documented, and removing it again would constitute a flagrant violation that we would contest through every available channel simultaneously." He paused. "You would not be worse off than you were at 10 o'clock this morning. You'd make noise," Harry said, "considerable noise." "Why?" "Because suppression of a wizarding heir's magic without consent or authorization is actionable under 17 statutes. Because the evidence of what was done to you exists in our diagnostic records and will be preserved regardless of what you sign or do not sign. Because Gringotts does not permit the violation of its clients' accounts to pass without consequence." A slight adjustment in his posture, not agitation, more like the settling of something decided. "And because what was done to you was wrong, these are not mutually exclusive reasons." Harry sat with that. Then he picked up the quill. It was the wrong size for his hand, proportioned for a goblin, longer and heavier than anything he'd used. He adjusted his grip. The ink on the nib was a very dark blue, nearly black. He signed once, the signature looking larger on the page than it felt from the inside, more definite, as if the parchment knew things about the future that Harry was still working out. Ragnarok took the document, reviewed it, passed it to the attendant with two precise words in a language Harry didn't recognize. Then he reached into the drawer at his right and placed a key on the desk, brass, old. The Potter crest worn smooth on the outer face, a rampant stag above a Latin motto that Harry didn't know yet. The wear on the bow suggested years of being held by people who held it often. "Your vault key," Ragnarok said, "the main vault, not the secondary account that brought you here." Harry picked it up. It was heavier than a key needed to be. Not heavy for practical reasons, heavy because it had been held for a long time by a lineage that had ended and was now unending. He held it for a moment, then put it in his pocket. "My uncle left," he said. He left the corridor at the 60-second mark and exited through the diagon alley entrance at the 93rd mark. Ragnarok's expression did not change. "He did not inquire after you." "No," Harry said, "he wouldn't have." He thought about Privet Drive, the cupboard. The particular acoustic signature of a house in which he was inconvenient. He thought about the progression from "I have to go back" to "do I have to go back" to the specific shape of the answer to that question, which was now different from what it would have been 2 hours ago. He looked at the ledger still open on the desk, the disbursement columns, the blank authorization column. The management arrangement filed 3 days after his parents were buried. He was not ready to examine the whole architecture of that. He knew it would need examining. He knew the examining would take a long time and cost something and change other things behind it, the way understanding large things always cost and changed. He set it in the place where he kept things that needed time. "Can I keep reading?" he said, meaning the ledger, "or do you need this desk?" A pause shorter than the previous pauses, a pause of recalibration, Harry thought, of someone revising upward again. "I'll have a clerk bring the secondary volumes," Ragnarok said. He did not move from his own chair. He pulled a separate stack of documents toward himself, his own work, clearly predating Harry's arrival, and picked up his own quill. "We'll order food at 6. Harry pulled the ledger across the desk. The secondary volumes arrived in 3 stacks: portfolio summary, property register, and a historical account log that dated back to the vault's establishment. Harry started with the portfolio summary because the current state was more immediately relevant than the history, and made 3 marginal notes in his first 20 minutes, which the clerk who'd placed the volumes observed with an expression that Harry catalogued as recalibration, goblin variant, 3rd instance today. At some point, a plate of food appeared at his elbow. It was not the edge of a meal. It was a full plate proportioned correctly, with the implicit understanding that food was fuel and fuel was a practical matter with no significance beyond its function. Harry ate without putting the ledger down. The portfolio summary had an anomaly on page 4. 3 investment positions in funds that, cross-referenced against the external management records, had been placed in the same quarter that 2 of the manager's associated accounts had been established. Not theft, a pattern. He noted the page number and the cross-reference. On page 9, a property listing for what was described as Potter Estate, Godric's Hollow, West Country, with a status notation, uninhabited, structural damage. Ward collapse, 31 October 1981. The address sat on the page the way addresses sit when they mean more than addresses usually mean. Harry noted it. Set it in the place for things that needed time. The Latin motto, mors principium est. He didn't know Latin. He looked around the office for a reference volume and located one on the shelf behind Ragnar's right shoulder, a dictionary of classical languages, the spine worn enough to suggest regular use. He noted its location for later. By 8 o'clock, he had worked through the portfolio summary and most of the property register, had 3 pages of notes on the anomalies, and had asked Ragnar 4 questions, all of them about the mechanics of the charter provision and what the formal notification requirements were now that he'd signed. Ragnar answered each one with the same quality of attention, full, direct, not adjusted for the fact of Harry's age, which Harry was beginning to understand was a specific and deliberate policy rather than an oversight. At 8:30, Ragnar set his own work down and looked at Harry. The guest quarters are on the lower east corridor. The arrangement is temporary. The charter provision covers legal residence, but the administrative formalization will take several days. I'll have someone show you. Is there a copy of a Latin dictionary I can take with me? Ragnar looked at him for a moment. Then he reached behind his right shoulder without turning, took the reference volume from the shelf and placed it on the desk beside Harry's notes. Keep it, he said. Harry put it on top of the notes stack. He picked up the vault key from where he'd set it down 2 hours ago when the pocket had become inconvenient and held it for a moment. The crest, the stag. The motto in its worn brass. What does it mean? He said. Mors principium est. Ragnar stood. Death is the beginning. He walked to the door and spoke to the attendant outside in the same language Harry didn't know. Then he looked back. The Dursley property ward condition, he said, will be formally reported to the ministry's ward monitoring office tomorrow. It will be in the record. He held Harry's gaze. So will everything from today. Good, Harry said. The attendant came in to show Harry to the guest quarters. Harry gathered his notes, the Latin dictionary, the ledger cross-references. The vault key went back in his pocket. The plate cleared, stayed on the desk. The guest quarters were spare and exact: stone, 1 tapestry in copper and gold thread, a bed too large by a factor of roughly 2, a desk at the window. The window looked out over the upper levels of the bank, at the amber exterior lights coming on as the evening settled. He could see a slice of Diagon Alley below, people still moving, slower now, the end-of-day pattern replacing the midday density. He put the notes and the dictionary on the desk. He stood at the window for a while, not thinking about any one thing, letting the day resolve into its components without trying to arrange them yet. The rune light in the vault corridor, the sound of Vernon running, the blank column in the disbursement ledger, line after line after line. The way the world had gotten louder and more present when the charms came off, as if the whole of it had been waiting for him to arrive properly. The building hummed around him. Not metaphorically as literally, the low-frequency vibration of wards and vaultwork and old, deep stone, audible to him now in a way it had not been in the morning when he walked in. He turned from the window and sat at the desk. He opened the Latin dictionary to the M section, found the relevant entry, and wrote the translation at the top of his notes page in careful print, the way he wrote things he intended to remember. Mors principium est, death is the beginning. He read it back. He thought about what it meant practically, not in the heraldic sense, not the poetic sense, but as a working description of something. Old walls breaking. New ones not yet built, the gap between them, which was where he was and which was cold and which was his. He left the translation at the top of the page and turned to the portfolio anomalies. He worked until midnight. When he finally put the work down, the alley outside was quiet and dark, the amber lights of Gringotts the only constant in the street. He lay down on the bed that was too large and looked at the ceiling. He thought about the door. The handprint the exact size of his palm, worn into the pale stone over some unmeasurable time by some sequence of heirs who had stood in that corridor before him. He thought about, recognized, he did not examine what he thought about that. He was asleep in 4 minutes, the building humming around him, the vault key in his pocket, his notes on the desk in careful print, the whole long machinery of what came next waiting, patient for morning. Chapter 2, the architecture of leverage. The fire in the guest room grate had burned down to a bed of orange coals by the time Harry woke at 5:10, and the first thing he did, before he was fully conscious of deciding anything, was cross to the desk and open the portfolio summary to the page with the flagged anomalies. The page was where he'd left it, of course it was. This was not Privet Drive, where leaving anything unattended was an invitation for it to be moved or used or simply disappeared by the ambient hostility of the household. He sat down, pulled the notes toward him, and read back what he'd written the previous night to make sure it was still accurate now that his mind was rested. It was, the cross-reference held. The 3 investment positions had been placed in the same 8-week window as the establishment of 2 funds that appeared in the manager's broader financial record, which Gnarlthorne had included as an appendix without being asked, which told Harry something about Gnarlthorne to be vehicles primarily serving the manager's institutional allies, not Harry's. He added 1 line to the notes, then he turned to the property register and started where he'd left off. At 6:20, someone knocked twice on the door, quietly, the knock of someone who considers waking a sleeping person in position and has adjusted the volume accordingly. Harry said, "Come in." The goblin who entered was not one he'd met. Female, older, with a delivery tray holding a pot of something hot, a cup, and 2 covered dishes. She set it on the corner of the desk without displacing the documents, which required a degree of spatial precision that Harry noted with appreciation. "Breakfast," she said. "And the director sends this." She placed a single folded document beside the tray. Harry unfolded it. It was the formal notification of his charter provision filing, the official record of his legal residency, on Gringotts letterhead with a reference number, a date stamp reading this morning's date, and Ragnar's signature in an ink that was slightly different from the body text, darker, with the deliberateness of a signature that is also a commitment. He read it twice, then he folded it precisely along its original crease and placed it inside the front cover of the Latin dictionary, which was the sturdiest thing on the desk. He ate and kept reading. The owl arrived at 6:52. Harry heard the wing beat on the window ledge before he saw it, a large tawny, carrying a letter with a seal he recognized from the previous day's memory, the elaborate bordered script P in purple wax. He'd seen it for approximately 3 seconds on a Tuesday evening through a crack in a kitchen door, and he'd retained it with the accuracy of someone who had learned early that details others dismissed were usually the ones that mattered. He opened the window. The owl extended its leg with the patience of long practice. He took the letter and the owl waited, 3 paragraphs. He read them at the pace he read everything, fast, complete, nothing skipped. The first paragraph expressed concern for Harry's well-being in terms that were warm and specific in the way of a very skilled craftsman's work, each word placed to support a load. The second paragraph offered Dumbledore's personal availability. "At whatever time and location suits you best, Harry, I am entirely at your disposal," and contained, embedded in a subordinate clause with the naturalness of something that had always been there, the suggestion that a return to familiar surroundings would be beneficial during what must be a confusing time. The third paragraph mentioned Petunia and Vernon, who were worried, and used the word love in connection with them in a way that was technically not a claim but functioned as one. Harry read the third paragraph twice. He put the letter on the left side of the desk, the side he was designating, he realized, for things that required a response rather than things that were purely informational, and took a piece of Gringotts correspondence paper from the stack the clerk had left. He wrote the reply in 3 sentences. He read them back. He added 4 words to the second sentence that made the legal citation more specific. He read it back again. "Dear Chief Warlock Dumbledore, per the terms of the hereditary account provision, Gringotts Charter Clause 7b, 1689, I am currently in legal residence at Gringotts Wizarding Bank as acting representative of the House of Potter account. I am well and do not require relocation. Please direct all future administrative matters pertaining to the Potter estate to my Gringotts account manager and direct all further personal correspondence through Gringotts postal channels. Regards, H.J. Potter." He read it one final time. The tone was correct, not hostile, not warm, bureaucratically precise in the way that made hostility unnecessary. He gave it to the owl left. Harry went back to the property register. Ragnock arrived at 8 with a goblin Harry hadn't met. The new arrival was older than Ragnock. Harry estimated this from the quality of the stillness, the accumulated patience of someone who had been sitting in difficult rooms for a long time and had found it not unpleasant, with a scar running from just below his left ear to the hinge of his jaw, the kind of scar that comes from something that meant to do more and was stopped. He carried a portfolio case that was full enough to have its own weight distribution, which Harry noticed in the way it sat against his leg. Gnarlthorn, Ragnock said without preamble, he manages the Potter investment portfolio. You'll be working together on the quarterly review. Gnarlthorn looked at Harry with the same quality of attention Harry had now received from 3 goblins in this building, the recalibration, the willingness to update, and pulled a chair up to the desk without being invited, which Harry read as indicating either familiarity with the space or a constitutional indifference to ceremony. Possibly both. I flagged 3 positions in the portfolio summary, Harry said, and turned to the relevant page. As did I, Gnarlthorn said and opened his portfolio case. They worked for 2 hours. The anomalies were, in Gnarlthorn's assessment, a pattern of decisions rather than individual acts, a sustained orientation of the management strategy toward vehicles that generated modest returns for the Potter account while generating more significant returns for associated interests. The mechanism was legal. The intent was demonstrable only as a pattern, not as a document with intent written on it. Can we prove it? Harry said. Prove it to whom? Gnarlthorn looked at him steadily. To the Wizengamot, no. The external manager operated within their legal framework. To our own records, yes, entirely. The conflict of interest notation has been in the file since 1983. Since 1983, Harry said, we cannot act on a client's behalf without a representative authorizing action. He held Harry's gaze in the way of someone who is making a specific point without stating it as a point. We were waiting. Harry thought about 1983. He had been 3 years old in 1983. He thought about what it meant that the record had been sitting in a Gringotts file, accurate and preserved for 3 years, waiting for someone who did not know to come and ask. He pointed to the 3 positions. Close these. Move the assets into the Highland Property Trust, Gnarlthorn said, overlapping cleanly, the way 2 people overlap when they've arrived at the same place by different routes. Established vehicles, strong deed protections, historical returns in the upper quartile. That one, Harry said. The scratch of Gnarlthorn's quill was precise and final. Harry watched the notation go onto the page and felt, for the first time, the specific quality of a decision that was his, made on his terms with his name on the authorization column. He looked at the authorization column for 1 second, then he turned the page. Ragnock, who had been working on his own documents at the far end of the desk, said without looking up, the ward mapping update arrived this morning. He placed a document on the desk between himself and Harry, the same format as yesterday's ward resonance chart but updated, more properties, more notations, the annotations in red and amber rather than the green of stable readings. Harry scanned it. 17 properties in the 38-mile radius, stress fractures on 6, 1 partial collapse. He found the Dursley address, ward integrity 34%, status deteriorating. Projected full collapse 72-96 hours, the blood protection ward, Ragnock said, the outermost layer of his network. It was keyed to your residence there, your continued presence reinforced it. Your departure last night accelerated the deterioration. So his argument for the motion, Harry said, includes the fact that the ward protecting me has now collapsed, will collapse. But yes, Ragnock set his quill down. The emergency petition was filed at 7:42 a.m. You will have received a copy shortly. Harry looked at the document tray beside the desk. There was a new edition he hadn't opened yet, a thick cream envelope with a wax seal he didn't recognize. Not Dumbledore's personal seal, institutional. He opened it. The language of the motion was careful and dense and took him 4 minutes to read fully. Emergency petition to the Wizengamot under the magical minor welfare provision. Basis, uncontrolled magical discharge on August 19 by a minor with no registered magical supervision, posing risk to the minor and to the surrounding community. Requested remedy, emergency transfer of guardianship to a Wizengamot-appointed representative, pending formal hearing. The words uncontrolled magical discharge sat on the page. Harry read them twice. It was controlled, he said. By you, Ragnock said, without a registered magical supervisor present and without ministry notification. Under the terms of the welfare provision, that constitutes, I know what it constitutes. He put the motion document on the left side of the desk, beside Dumbledore's letter. He looked at both of them. What are our options? Ragnarok listed them with the economy of someone who had prepared the list before Harry asked. Challenge the motion's factual basis, slow, contested ground that Dumbledore knew well. Seek a delay through the charter provisions, procedural rights possible, buying weeks, not solving anything. Or invoke the floor clause. Tell me about the floor clause, Harry said, though he had read it at 6:30 a.m. and could have recited it. The head of a most ancient and noble house may address the Wisengamot directly before any motion affecting their household's legal status is put to a vote. The minimum notice is 30 minutes prior to the scheduled motion time. The motion is scheduled for 2 p.m. Ragnarok looked at Harry. We have a noon window with the clerk's office, and I'd be the first minor to invoke it, Harry said. Yes. Is there an age restriction in the clause? No. Harry was quiet for 11 seconds. He was thinking about the motion's language, uncontrolled, risk, community, and about the specific work those words were doing. They were not describing what had happened in the vault corridor. They were describing a version of what had happened that would be legible to people who had not been there, in terms that activated the specific anxieties of a community still close enough to a recent war to flinch at the word uncontrolled when it appeared next to the word magical. Smart, he thought. Genuinely smart. The floor clause, he said. I want to use it. The door opened. She was in the doorway before Harry had processed the knock, which meant she moved fast as a default rather than situationally. Green robes. Dark hair going silver at the temples. The posture of someone who has spent decades expecting to be the authority in any room she walks into and has found this largely confirmed. She looked at Harry, he looked at her. There was a moment, 3-4 seconds, in which she was clearly revising something, and the revision was visible in the specific stillness that came over her face. The stillness of someone who had built an expectation and is now standing in front of what the expectation was trying to describe. He had been expecting someone frightening. She was not frightening. She was quick and she was sharp, and she was, he saw immediately, in some form of discomfort that she was managing with the precision of someone who had been managing discomfort in professional contexts for a long time. Minerva McGonagall, Ragnarok said. He had not stood. Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts. You were not expected until 9. It is 8:53, McGonagall said, in an accent that landed on its consonants like someone who found imprecision irritating. She looked at the room, the desk, the documents, Gnarlthorne's portfolio case, the notes in Harry's careful print. She looked back at Harry. I was at the front desk at 8:40. They were following procedure, Ragnarok said. She crossed to the chair beside Harry's and sat with the directness of someone who considers sitting a practical act rather than a social one. She looked at Harry again. He had the impression she kept looking because she kept finding what she saw insufficient to explain itself. Harry, she said, Professor. A pause. She had come in with something prepared. He could see the prepared thing in the structure of her attention and was choosing right now in real time whether to say it. She chose differently. Are you all right? Yes, you slept here. There's a guest room. Her gaze moved briefly around the office, the food tray, the notes, the documents sorted into their positions on the desk. You've been working since 5 a.m. He watched her processing this. Did Dumbledore send you? The question was not an accusation. He made it flat and informational, a request for accurate data about the dynamics of the situation. He asked me to come, she said. Yes, a beat precise in its brevity. He's concerned. Harry picked up Dumbledore's letter from the left side of the desk and placed it at the center. He didn't open it. McGonagall looked at it, recognized the seal. I replied, Harry said. He received it before I left the school. Her tone was careful in a way that had edges. It was very precisely worded. I meant it to be. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating the terms of an engagement they thought they understood. Then she said, he is trying to help you. Whatever else you may think, he believes that. I think he does, Harry said. He turned to face the desk, to the ward mapping document with its red notations. He placed 6 suppression charms on me when I was 1 year old. He designed the outermost one specifically to evade Gringotts' diagnostic sensors, which means he knew this bank would eventually run a standard test on me, and he planned for us not to find them. He looked up at her. That's not helping me, that's managing me. Those are different things. McGonagall was very still. There are people who believe, she said, and the careful quality of her voice was doing specific work, holding something back while stating something else, that the period following Voldemort's defeat required extraordinary measures. That the risk to you was, to me, Harry said, or from me, she stopped. The charms were suppressors. They didn't make me safer from outside threats. They made my magic smaller, quieter, harder to detect. If the goal was protection, that's not the mechanism you'd use. He kept his voice level, clipped, the rhythm of someone making a case to themselves as much as to the room. The goal was that I'd arrive at Hogwarts at 11, having had no idea what I was. No knowledge of my family, my estate, my name as anything other than something that made my aunt uncomfortable. No way to ask questions because I wouldn't have known what questions to ask. He looked at her directly, under whose guidance. The silence was the kind that comes after something true has been said and the room is deciding what to do with it. McGonagall looked at Harry for a long time, not past him, not at the space that adults addressed when they were managing a child. At him with the specific quality of someone who is revising not just an assessment, but a framework. "I didn't know," she said, "about the charms." "I know," Harry said, "I believe you." Because he did, her discomfort was the specific discomfort of someone being confronted with actions taken in their proximity without their knowledge, and the distinction between that and complicity was one Harry had had reason to learn precisely. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." He turned the vault key over in his pocket, the weight of it useful for organizing thought. "At Hogwarts. Is anyone ever surprised by a student, not in lessons, by what they actually think?" She blinked. The question was not on her list, and she didn't pretend it was. She considered it with the honesty of someone who has been asked a real question and intends to give a real answer. "Yes," she said, and the word came out differently from everything before it, less constructed, more immediate. "Not often, but yes." Harry nodded once. He pulled the ward mapping document back toward him. Ragnarok, the motion language, uncontrolled magical discharge. "What's the formal counterclaim?" "That the discharge was heir-initiated contact with a hereditary vault mechanism, constituting a legal exercise of property rights under charter provision." "That won't land in the chamber," Harry said, not dismissively, evaluatively. "They'll hear vault mechanism and think we're arguing a technicality." "I want to address the motion directly, by invoking the floor clause," McGonagall said. "Yes," she leaned forward. Not with condescension, with the directness of someone who has decided to engage honestly and considers leaning a part of that. "If you walk into that chamber, you are 6 years old, addressing witches and wizards who have been navigating those politics since before your parents were born. Albus has been the center of gravity in that room for 30 years. Whatever he did, and I am not dismissing it, Harry, I am not. "I'm not trying to win," Harry said. She stopped. "I don't need to win, I need to make something public." He looked at her and his voice was entirely level, each word placed like a foot on known ground. "If the charms were applied illegally, if the estate has been mismanaged for 5 years, that's in Gringotts records, permanently. But if Dumbledore puts me back under his management through a Wisengamot motion without anyone in that chamber ever having to look at what he did, those records sit in a vault and the arrangement continues and the record is functionally invisible." He picked up the motion document, held it briefly, put it down. "If I ask the question in public in the chamber on the official record, he has to answer, in public, on record. And the answer, whatever it is, cannot be buried." McGonagall looked at him for a long time. Something shifted in her face, not softening, not dissolving, something more structural. The expression of someone whose understanding of a situation has been revised at a level beneath the surface, in the place where the deeper premises lie. "He will answer well," she said, honest, not admiring, a statement of tactical fact. "He always does. He has been answering questions for 30 years, and I have never once seen him at a loss." "That's fine," Harry said. "I only need him to answer." The formal Potter robes were a problem with a logistical solution. Gnarlthorne procured them in 40 minutes through a mechanism he described only as a call to the Diagon Alley tailoring account, and what arrived was a robe in very dark blue, the Potter house color, as listed in the heraldic register Harry had located in the property records, altered by a Gringotts charm to fit a child's measurements. The alteration was precise. The robe was not too large. It was exactly the right size for a child wearing formal clothes for the first time, which was its own kind of wrong, but it was the correct wrong, the kind you move through rather than around. Harry looked at himself in the mirror on the guest room wall. His hair was doing what it had always done, which no specific intervention in the preceding 11 years had managed to change, and which today's occasion did not improve. The robe was neat. He was not neat inside the robe, but the robe itself was correct. He thought, fine. Then he went back to the desk for the notes he'd decided to bring. Ragnarok was in the corridor. He had changed into director's formal wear, which was more armored than Harry had expected, a gorget of dark, non-reflective metal at the throat, a chain of office in something that was neither gold nor silver but between them, the kind of alloy you choose when you want to say authority without saying display. 3 goblins Harry didn't know flanked him at a distance that said escort without saying guard. "You don't have to do this today," Ragnock said. "We can request a procedural delay of." "If we delay," Harry said, "he has more time." "Yes, then we don't delay." Ragnock held his gaze for 1 second in the way he held things, fully, without flinching, without approval or disapproval, with the simple recognition of a man who has met many people and learned to see them accurately. Then he turned for the cart platform. "The clerk's office appointment is at noon. The chamber session begins at 2. Harry fell into step beside him. McGonagall, he noticed, was already at the platform. She had not left the building, apparently. She had changed nothing about her appearance, which told him she had not expected to have time to, which told him she had made a decision sometime in the past 40 minutes about what she was going to do and where she was going to be. She did not explain herself. He did not ask. They took the cart. The Wizengamot chamber was black stone throughout, the same variety as the Potter vault door. Harry noticed this in the 2 seconds available before the scale of the room reorganized his attention. The ceilings were high enough to constitute their own climate, and the acoustics were dry and absorptive. A room specifically designed to ensure that speaking in it was a deliberate act, that you chose your words knowing the room would take them and keep them. The galleries were perhaps 60% occupied. Emergency session, short notice, enough for quorum, not a full house. But the front benches were full, and one of those seats held Dumbledore. He looked from across the chamber exactly as Harry had imagined him from the fragments of his name overheard through walls and floors, tall, white-haired, in purple robes of a specific shade that communicated authority without aggression. He was sitting with his hands folded on the bench in a posture of complete composure, and when Harry was led to the speaking floor, Dumbledore looked at him with blue eyes that were serious, attentive, and not unkind. That last part was, Harry noted, the most complicated part. The chair was occupied by Madame Longbottom, a formidable woman with a stuffed vulture on her hat that Harry looked at for 3 seconds before concluding it was preserved rather than living, who was reading from a parchment with the focused expression of someone who considers procedural accuracy a form of respect. She looked up. Under Charter Provision 7, Clause B, the floor is recognized for the representative of the most ancient and noble House of Potter. Her voice was flat and competent and left no space for commentary. "You may proceed when ready." Harry walked to the center of the floor. He was aware of his appearance. 6 years old, formally robed, hair unmanageable, shoes that were the right size. He could see in the galleries the specific expression of people confronted by something their expectations had not prepared them for, not hostility, not sympathy, the thing between them that is pure recalibration. He let it run. He stood in the center of the floor and waited until the chamber was fully quiet, which took longer than he'd estimated, and then waited 3 more seconds. Then he spoke. Quietly, not because he was intimidated, but because the acoustics were absorptive and a quiet voice in a room like this was heard with more attention than a raised one. "I'd like to ask a question before this motion proceeds," he said. The room took his voice and returned it clean. "The Magical Practice Regulation of 1953 states that no practitioner may suppress the natural magic of a wizarding person without that person's knowledge and written consent, or, in the case of a minor, without the knowledge and written consent of the minor's legal guardians." He stopped. "Let the statute sit. The House of Potter account records at Gringotts contain ward resonance data documenting 6 distinct suppression charms placed on me on or after November 1st, 1981. I was 1 year old. Both of my parents were deceased. The magical signature on all 6 charms belongs to the Chief Warlock." The quality of attention in the chamber changed, not loudly, these were people trained to composure, but audibly, in the way a room full of very still people is audible. "My question is this," Harry said. "What is the legal basis under which the Chief Warlock suppressed the magic of a legal heir, without that heir's consent, without the heir's knowledge, and without the knowledge of any surviving guardian who could consent on the heir's behalf?" He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked back. The blue eyes had not changed, serious, attentive, not unkind. He stood without a cue from Madame Longbottom, in the way of someone who has carried authority long enough that it no longer requires external permission to express itself. He looked at the chamber first, then at Harry. He was addressing both, and the address to both was itself the answer to a question Harry hadn't asked out loud. This man has been doing this for 30 years, and he is very good at it. "The question," Dumbledore said in the warm, precise tones of someone who has used their voice as an instrument long enough to have mastered every register it contains, "deserves an honest answer." He paused. Harry watched him use the pause not to gather himself. He didn't need gathering, but to let the room settle into listening. A conductor's pause. "In the weeks following Lord Voldemort's first defeat," Dumbledore said, "the wizarding world was in a state that I can only describe as traumatic fragility. His defeat was sudden and incomplete. His followers remained, his ideological architecture remained, and the child who had survived the attack that destroyed him was now both the symbol of that survival and the most significant target remaining in Britain." He spoke with the measured gravity of someone describing events they lived through and have thought about deeply since. "The protections I placed were not taken lightly. I placed them because the magical signature of a child with a core of Harry's potential, fully operational, fully visible, would have been detectable to any practitioner scanning for it. And there were practitioners scanning for it. Silence, the silence of a room that is listening. I placed them because an untrained magical core of that magnitude in an infant experiencing grief and displacement posed a genuine risk of accidental discharge, harm to the child himself and to those around him. I placed them because the alternative was leaving a 1-year-old without protection in a world that was actively looking for him." He looked at Harry with the specific care of someone who is not performing care and is also, simultaneously, a man who makes political calculations. Both things were true. Harry could see both. They were an act of love, imperfect, perhaps wrong, but love. Harry counted 3 seconds. He said, "I'm 6. Dumbledore looked at him. "You placed those charms when I was 1 and you maintained them for 5 years. If they were an emergency response to an acute threat, when was the emergency over?" He kept the rhythm of it, short, declarative, no lifting of the voice at the end of questions, because questions whose tone announced themselves as questions were weaker than questions that arrived as statements. "If the threat reduced, where is the written review? If they were temporary, where is the date of planned removal? And if they were an act of love," he paused, one beat, the way he'd watched Dumbledore pause, "where is the record that you intended to tell me about them?" "About any of this? Before I arrived at Hogwarts at 11, having spent my entire life not knowing I was a wizard, not knowing my parents' names meant anything, not knowing that someone had been pressing my magic into 14% of itself since before I could form a sentence. The chamber was a very still place." Dumbledore held his gaze. He did not look away. He did not look cornered. He looked for the first time like a man completing a calculation he had been certain of and finding the result unexpectedly open. "The review," he said carefully, "was intended to coincide with your introduction to the wizarding world, with your acceptance to Hogwarts. At that point, you would have guidance, support, experienced mentors who could help you manage." "Your guidance," Harry said, a pause. "Yes," Dumbledore said quietly. "Mine. So the plan," Harry said, "was to suppress my magic for 10 years without telling me, and then introduce me to a world I had no preparation for, with no independent advisor, no prior knowledge of my family or my estate, under the direction of the same person who had been making decisions about my life since I was 1 day old." He looked at the chamber, at the 60% of seats that were occupied, at the faces in the galleries. "I'm not here to argue that the chief warlock wanted to hurt me. I don't believe that." He looked back at Dumbledore. "I'm here to note that when I was 1 year old, a decision was made about who I should be and how I should arrive in this world, and that decision has been running forward for 5 years without anyone checking whether it was still right. The motion before this body asks you to formalize that arrangement." He looked at the chamber again. "I'm asking you to consider whether, given what exists in Gringotts ward archives, which are now part of the permanent record, as of yesterday, that is a decision you want to make in public, on record today." He walked back to Ragnarok. The director said nothing. He did not need to. The chamber was doing what chambers do when the terms of something have changed. It was recalibrating. The 40 minutes between Harry's address and the vote were not silent. Ragnarok received 8 notes via Goblin courier during that time. Harry watched him read each one, make a brief notation, and hand it to the attendant at his shoulder. The pattern of the notations suggested to Harry that Ragnarok had allies in the gallery who had been operating based on the speed of the first note since before the session began. He noted this without surprise. Of course, Ragnarok had allies. Ragnarok had been doing this for decades. Dumbledore spoke twice more from the floor, once to clarify the legal basis of his guardianship filing, once to propose an amendment that would include an independent review of the management arrangement as a condition of any guardianship transfer. Both times his voice was steady, precise, and warm in the way of a very old instrument played by a master. The amendment that was eventually voted on was not Dumbledore's. It had been revised 3 times, and its final language was formal inquiry into the management of the Potter estate. The Potter accounts Gringotts records to be submitted as evidence. Harry to remain in Gringotts' legal custody pending the inquiry's conclusion. Harry looked at the final language and thought, not what I asked for, better than what I asked for. Madame Longbottom called the vote. 47 to 21. The gavel landed and the chamber began to move, the particular movement of a body that has voted and is now privately recalibrating everything that followed from the previous arrangement. Harry watched it. He watched Dumbledore too. The headmaster sat. He did not show defeat because he had not been defeated, and he knew it. The motion had not passed as written, the guardianship transfer had not gone through. What had passed was a constraint on his authority and a formalization of Harry's independence, both of which were meaningful but neither of which was final. He had 30 years of political architecture, and he would use it, methodically and intelligently and without malice, to rebuild what had been disrupted today. Harry knew this. He looked at Dumbledore across the chamber, and Dumbledore looked back, and neither of them was under any illusion about what had happened here or what came next. What had happened was, the question had been asked, in public, on record. The answer had been given, in public, on record. That was different from it not existing. The Ministry of Magic atrium was high-ceilinged and gave off the particular self-importance of architecture that wants to be impressive and is, in fact, impressive and knows it. Harry walked through it at Ragnarok's left shoulder with the notes from the session in his hand and the vault key in his pocket, and the sensation, not triumph, more tectonic, more like the settling of a thing that had been under pressure, running through him at a frequency slightly too low for his body to express as anything external. People looked. He let them look. In the Floo station at the far end of the atrium, McGonagall was standing at the edge of the connection queue, not in it. She had been in the gallery during the session. Harry had placed her in the 3rd row, right side, at approximately the 11-minute mark of his address, based on the quality of attention coming from that direction. She had not spoken during or after. She was not on an official errand now. She was standing at the edge of the queue with her hands folded in front of her in a posture that Harry read as someone who has decided something and is deciding still how to say it. He stopped. She looked at him for a moment, then she said, "I'll be in Hogsmeade on the 1st Saturday of every month, September through June." Crisp, the accent sharper than usual, the specific sharpness of someone stating a thing before they can reconsider it. No official capacity, just tea. Harry looked at her. "Can I ask you questions?" "You can ask me questions about anything you like." "All right," he said. "I'll find you." She nodded. She walked to the flue without elaborating and was gone in a rush of green flame. Harry stood in the station for 4 seconds, which was long enough to register what had just happened without examining it so closely that it became something he needed to manage. He turned and walked to the flue connection for Diagon Alley. The evening session with Gnarlthorn ran until 6:30. 3 flags from the morning's portfolio work required formal authorization before close of business. Harry signed all 3, made 2 additional notes for the next morning, and sent Gnarlthorn off with the portfolio case and the specific satisfaction of someone who has spent a day doing useful work and found the work sufficient. At 7, Harry ate the meal that appeared on the corner of the desk and kept reading. The property register had a section he'd skipped the previous night, estate correspondence, letters between the Potter account manager and various legal bodies, reaching back far enough to include letters signed by people whose names appeared in the historical ledger as predecessors. He read one from 1943, Fleamont Potter, requesting a review of the Wisengamot's restriction on goblin-made artifacts, in language that was formal and precise, and had a specific quality of someone making an argument they have made before and intend to keep making. He read one from 1974, James Potter, age 14, corresponding about the establishment of a trust account for educational expenses, in handwriting that slanted left and moved fast. He set that one down. He looked at the handwriting for a while, then he turned to the section on estate properties, the full register, not the summary, and found Godric's Hollow listed 3 pages in. The notation was the same as the summary: uninhabited, structural damage, ward collapse October 31, 1981. Below that, in smaller text, site preserved under Ministry Magical Heritage provision by order of APWB. Dumbledore, November 3, 1981. Preserved. He had not been told about it. He had not been asked about it. The house where his parents died was a heritage site under the management of the same person who had managed everything else, and Harry had not known it existed. He put the register down. He noted, not ready. There was a difference between the analytical recognition that something would need to be examined and the actual act of examining it, and the letter in his father's fast slanting handwriting had moved something in the place where he kept things that needed time, and those things were now somewhat closer to the surface than they'd been this morning. He stood up and put 2 more pieces of wood on the fire. The fire had burned down to orange coals again, the same as when he'd woken. He crouched in front of it and watched the new wood catch, the way fire moves through cold material, the specific progression from contact to heat to the first orange edge of ignition, nothing instantaneous, everything in sequence. He watched it until both pieces were fully lit. Then he heard Ragnarok. The director came in without knocking, which was not a violation because Harry had not yet worked out whether knocking was a convention Ragnarok observed, and the question was now answered. It was not. He came in with a sheaf of documents and placed them on the desk. The day's final briefing. Harry had seen the rhythm of it now, morning briefing, evening summary, everything in between negotiated as needed. The inquiry timeline is approximately 6 months, Ragnarok said. He remained standing, which was unusual. He generally sat. The motions passage formally suspends the external management arrangement pending findings. Gnarlthorn is assigned as your lead advisor. You'll have his full availability. Good, Harry said. He was still looking at the fire. You'll need tutors. Standard wizarding education at your level includes goblin contract law, Harry said. I want to actually learn it, not an introduction. A pause. I'll add it to the schedule, Ragnarok said. Harry turned from the fire and looked at him. The inquiry will run 6 months. What happens at the end of it? That depends on the findings, and on what we submit as evidence. Yes, Harry looked at the desk, the property register open to the Godric's Hollow page, the portfolio notes. The Latin dictionary with the charter filing tucked inside its front cover, the day's session notes in his hand, which he set down on the desk. The 1943 letter, he said, from Fleamont Potter. He was arguing against the artifact restriction. He argued that case 3 times over 20 years, Ragnarok said. Lost each time. Why? He didn't have the floor clause. He was arguing as a private citizen through standard Wisengamot channels against a well-organized establishment position. A pause. The outcome would likely have been different with the mechanism you use today. Harry looked at the letter in the register, the neat formal script of a great-great-grandfather making an argument across 80 years. He thought about the floor clause, about the inquiry, about 6 months of evidence submission and the specific architecture of what could be built in 6 months with full account access in Gnarlthorn's portfolio, expertise in Ragnarok's political contacts, and the Gringotts ward records that were now permanently and publicly part of the inquiry file. He thought about Dumbledore sitting in the chamber with 30 years of political architecture already rebuilding. He thought 6 months is enough time. He picked up his pen. Ragnarok set something on the desk, not a document, a key. Small, dark with a square bow, no crest, no designation, the plain utility of something that has one purpose and performs it without ceremony. The East Wing has permanent quarters, Ragnarok said. His voice was its usual register, level, measured, allocating exactly as many words as the statement required. Not guest rooms. The charter provision covers legal residence without specifying the grade. The East Wing rooms require a specific key. He looked at the key on the desk, then at Harry. They haven't been occupied in some years. It will take a few days to prepare them properly. Harry looked at the key. He reached out and picked it up. It was lighter than the vault key, not lighter because it mattered less, lighter because it was a different kind of thing, a different category of weight. The vault key was inheritance. This was something else. He held it. Thank you, he said. Ragnarok turned for the door. He did not say you're welcome, he said. Tutoring begins Monday. I'll have a schedule sent to your room, which was the same thing rendered in the grammar of someone who considers action more precise than sentiment, and for whom the precision is itself a form of care. He left. Harry sat down. He put the room key beside the vault key on the desk, the two of them side by side, one worn smooth from generations of hands, one new to being held. He looked at them for a moment. Then he pulled the property register back toward him and turned away from the Godric's Hollow page to the section he hadn't reached yet. The trust provisions, the educational endowments, the records of what the House of Potter had done with its weight across the decades before the weight had been set down. There was a great deal he didn't know yet. The list was long and specific and would take months to work through properly. The contract law, the ward theory, the political architecture of the Wisengamot and its pressure points, the full scope of what was in the inquiry file and what could still be added to it. The inquiry was 6 months. After the inquiry was something else. After that was something else still. He was 6 years old. He had the vault key and the room key and 3 pages of portfolio notes and a letter in his father's fast slanting handwriting in a register that as of today was his to read. He had Gnarlthorn, who arrived with a full portfolio case and the specific quality of someone who has been waiting for the right questions. He had Ragnarok, who told him things plainly and expected him to understand them and was rarely disappointed. He had McGonagall first Saturday of every month, no official capacity, questions about anything. He had the floor clause, he had the ward records, he had the inquiry. He had, for the first time, a room that would require a specific key. Outside the window above Diagon Alley, the night was fully settled now, the street below quiet, the amber exterior lights of Gringotts holding steady in the dark, the building's deep hum audible in the stone of the walls and the floor beneath his feet. The fire behind him was warm in the uncomplicated way of a fire that has been given enough fuel. He opened the property register to the trust provisions and began to read.